I'm delighted to bring you all some more Karl Edward Wagner. We'll release this in a few parts, but coming up is the first part of the Karl Edward Wagner story, The Dark Muse. As with the last Kane story we put on here, Two Suns Setting, there's a reference to literature and to history. Listen to that as we go. The Dark Muse by Karl Edward Wagner. Prologue. Lightning colors, whining, whirling dirge of sonic pain coalesced to ecstasy. More dimly now, the tones muted, submerged. Form returned, images of imprisoned light, scintillant shapes that shimmered with the siren melody. Colors of piercing brilliance, sparkles of sound shivering through his senses. Lancinations of unendurable ecstasy ravened through his consciousness, starbirds of warring sensory impulses that slipped once more to coherent phenomena an instant before his mind shattered to follow into final chaos. Lustrous figures of nude beauty formed pirouetting patterns of dazzling perfection. For a timeless space he marveled upon their kaleidoscopic resplendency. His consciousness merged within the coruscant mosaic of their dance, the beauty of their dance, soul-wrenching wonder that staved off the shrill voices of pain, of terror that yammered upon the fringes of his awareness. An infinity of goddesses, or numberless images of a goddess, weaving through glacial mists of throbbing color. Now he understood that they were but infinite reflections of the one goddess, the goddess of beauty, shimmering upon all the mirrors of the cosmos. He desired to behold the true image of this beauty, and his spirit soared through the swirling patterns in search of the one true image. Time elapsed. Like a mote of interstellar debris drawn by the compellent attraction of a dark star, he fell unerringly toward the central focus of the ceaseless shifting labyrinth. At the heart of the vortex of pulsing color his quest was ended. Over the true image of beauty his awareness descended. He gazed upon the glowing porcelain of the goddess's perfect flesh, creamy majesty of unblemished form that radiated a warm luster of indescribable color. Her breasts were cones of floral delicacy, her hips dark with mystery, her limbs soft witchery as she pirouetted through the whirling dance. She saw him. The fierce welcome of her scarlet smile, the burning summons of her violet eyes invited him to share her dance. The chords of needle-pane color roiled about them as they spun, wove shards of light into feather mounds of song. She fell back upon the waving softness of fern patterns, opened to him her arm and red lips. As he drifted to her embrace, he marveled endlessly over the radiant perfection of line, the living fire of her flesh, sorcerous porcelain of warmth and velvet. Her smile changed, shadowed in pain or cruelty. Her breasts heaved with the pulse of her heart, her chest shuddered from the exertion of her breath, her creamy torso split along midline, the ribs sprang outward like spreading carpels of a blossom, beckoned in the breeze of sound. Explosive color washed over her altered form. Her slender, unjointed arms waved for him like the filaments of some obscenely tempting orchid. The smile broadened, and an impossible length of curling scarlet tongue licked towards his throat. Vibrations of perfumed anguish engulfed him. In sudden terror he struggled against her embrace, buffeted the enfolding, smothering petals. Her claws tore at his face, the needle tongue stabbed for his throat as he seized her boneless neck in a stranglehold, fought desperately to keep from merging with the vampirish ecstasy of death. The dream abruptly dissolved. Blood trickling from the gouges of her nails, Opyros stared numbly at the limp form whose throat he gripped. Dully he released his fingers, one by one. Cetiol's mottled face flushed as breath whistled past her bruised lips. Her heart was strong beneath Opyrus's palm, though she showed no sign yet of recovering consciousness. Vaguely relieved that he had not killed the girl, Opyrus carelessly draped the bedrobes over her still form and rose to find his clothing. The room shimmered through drug mists of ghost image. From each whorl of the dark oak paneling leered a face, so that he rested a moment on the edge of the bed until his head cleared and his long legs felt stronger. The temper of his present mistress was difficult to foresee. Best to leave before she awoke, the young nobleman reflected. The touch of his garments was strange to his fingers. After drawing pants and loose shirt over his bony frame, he despaired of his sandals and left the chamber barefoot. The evening was warm, though he was uncertain which evening it was. This new drug had left his mouth dry and foul, his mind a burned-over forest of half-consumed and heat-corroded shapes. For this, ale and diversion. The rambling town-house lay silent and empty as he padded through it. His servants, had he given them the night off? Too many gaps in his memory. Perhaps he would remember later. Retrieving a folder of unbound parchment from the litter of his study, Opyros the poet stumbled from his manor and drifted through the shadows of Enceljos in search of Kane. Chapter 1. Poet in the Night. Greasy light oozed onto the damp pavement from the doorway of Stanchek's tavern and cast puddles of smoky yellow through the tattered leather curtain. The colors still danced before his eyes as Opyros stepped over dark pockmarks in the broken paving, uncertain about the faces which peered back at him from the pools of black water. It had rained some time not long before, though the night above Enceljos' sprawling skyline was clear, as had been the autumn morning when he and Cetiol had dissolved a few grains of the new drug in a flagon of wine. Presumably this was the same day, since there was only a vague hint of hunger. A snarl of challenge came from the black alley adjoining the cavern, and he heard the rasp of unseen steel. Swinging the folio up like a shield, Opyros groped for the knife at his belt, but a second shape stirred in the darkness and growled, "Forget him, Hef. Don't you recognize the mad poet?" Opyros sidled past the alleyway, wondering whether he had been accosted by thieves or guards. Evidently this Hef was a stranger, since the poet made frequent visits to Stanchek's tavern. No sign marked the murky doorway, nor had the place any name other than Stanchek's, after the limping ex-mercenary who owned it. But the tavern was well known to the sort who gathered there, for Stanchek's was a dive of evil reputation, even in the brawling turmoil of Enceljos. The city guard did not patrol this, the oldest section of Enceljos. A monthly donation to its commander convinced him that it was an unwarranted risk of his men to send them into this iniquitous slum, where truly no man of honest intentions would venture. Law-abiding folk had their inns and taverns, and the growing ranks of Halbros Seranthos soldiery. Even his hot-tempered mercenaries tended to frequent the less forbidding places of amusement, the Red Bear, the Hanging Bandit, the Hound and Leopard, the Bad Dog, or even the Yardarm. To Stanchek's gathered the night creatures of Enceljos' underworld, and others whose role in life was less evident but of similarly dubious achievement. The folio snared a tattered fold as Opyros pushed through the grimy curtain, and he maintained his hold clumsily. 70 pairs of eyes looked toward his rattling entry, considered him briefly, and returned to other matters. The poet padded down the low flight of worn stone steps that lapped like waves of poured honey in a crescent past the doorway to the room below. Once the townhouse of a wealthy merchant, Stanchek's displayed the sunken central room with high-vaulted ceiling and horseshoe gallery of another age's architecture. Only in places across the floor could the original tiles be glimpsed, effaced and filthy, and ungainly pillars, mismatched construction, shored up the sagging galleries. Doorways opened onto rooms from off the gallery or led into cellars that ran like interconnected burrows beneath the tavern and surrounding buildings, blocked, supposedly, by rubble and back, where the main living quarters lay in toppled ruin. Business of a less open nature was conducted in these dim chambers, and although he believed he had visited them all, Opyros was not sorry to know that his search would not lead him into these warrens tonight. Seated at a corner table opposite the entrance, but close by the gaping darkness of the downward-leading stairs, Opyros caught sight of Kane. Even to his mazed vision, and in the uncertain light, there was no mistaking the massive, square-torsoed figure or the coppery glimmer of Kane's hair and short beard. He was not alone. Beside him at the table lounged a thuggish trio of indeterminate origins. Two of them, whose hulking stature and dark features bore the similarity of kinship, were coaxing a private show from a tavern dancer. The third, whose thin frame seemed to carry only gristle and tight-stretched muscle, was intent upon the fifth man at the table. This latter, a sharp-faced outlander whose clothes bore the dust of long miles, was arguing earnestly with Kane. Some sort of agreement was concluded as Opyros threaded his way to the back corner. Kane nodded to his lean companion, who produced a heavy purse and pushed it toward the traveler. The other loosened its drawstrings, released the furtive gleam of gold. Then Kane's broad hand closed over the almoner, and with a cold smile he drew it back across the table. The outlander appeared satisfied and rose to his feet. Kane remained seated, gave terse instructions to his three companions. The lean man retrieved the purse and, flanked by the brawny pair, followed the outlaw from the room. Opyros exchanged nodded greetings as they passed, then dropped into the chair beside Kane. Abandoned by her patrons, the dancing girl glanced at the poet uneasily, seemed relieved that the newcomer returned her stare without interest, and departed in a brassy rustle of bell-hung silks. At Kane's wave a husky serving girl trotted over. Thudding her crockery pitcher upon the table, she began to reach for the empty mugs. Kane shook his head as she stretched for those beside him and pointed to the mug used by the outlander. Leaving the others, she recovered this one, wiped the mouth of the stein on her greasy leather apron, filled it with dark ale from her pitcher, and pushed it toward the poet. Opyros gulped down the mug's bitter contents in the time it took for her to fill Kane's stein, and had the girl pour another before she left them. Kane's cold blue eyes studied the poet's scratched face, a sardonic grin breaking over his brutal features. "I rather expected you last night," he commented. "What happened to last night?" "I've been trying the new drug," Opyros answered. "And returned to tell the tale," observed Kane. "No mean feat, if Damat just blended the powder faithful to the formula I gave you." He lifted the folio onto the table. Opyros had carelessly leaned it against Kane's unbuckled sword. "Did you find the experience worthwhile?" "I think so," concluded Opyros. The ale seemed to hush the whining yammer at the threshold of his consciousness. There was a great deal of powerful visual imagery to it, some flashes of inspiration that I jotted down. Some of it I think I can use, though I still find myself blocked on night winds. He fumbled through the loose sheets of folio. Are you going to be busy tonight?" Kane absently scraped his nail across a flaking smear of brown which clung to the carven silver death's head of his sword pommel. Nothing that my men can't attend to. It promises to be a dull night, unless you're interested in watching Eberros gamble away 10 lifetimes' earnings at dice. Dammit Gist will find he has a pauper for first assistant come morning. Then I'll read you some of this, invited Opyros. He frowned over a loose page, turning the parchment sheet to the best exposure in the murky light. Oh, there's some more work on that Gods in Darkness fragment you tossed me. In their castle beyond the night, in their dungeon's evil light, gather the gods while even fades, and darkness weaves with many shades. I never wrote that, protested Kane. Seteol did that, Opyros explained. She has a keen mind for rhyme and meter. It rolls across the tongue well enough, but the rhyme has made it inaccurate to the substance of the poem. I thought we were agreed to strive for coherent imagery without the interference of rhyme. Meter will be intrusive enough if you translate. Just thought you'd be interested to hear how it would be done, Opyros broke in defensively. I still maintain that a poem well sung is far more effective than a poem well read, and infinitely superior to merely reading the words to yourself. Poetry is an expression of beauty, and beauty is an emotional awareness for which total appreciation demands a total sensual participation and response from its audience. You're asocial, Kane. You treat imagery on an individual, intellectual level, perhaps because your personal autism believes intellectual and emotional stimulation are inseparable. Vol, you're in a profound mood tonight, Kane cut in sarcastically. Are you certain of your insight, though? Drugs and ale will foster more prophecies and philosophies than a sober mind can hold together. That may be, Opyros countered, but they sometimes open doorways to truths obscured by the clutter of ordered thought. He started to replace the parchment sheet, his expression injured. Kane made an apologetic grimace. Let's hear the rest of what you done, he requested, and signed to a passing serving girl. His long fingers plucked the heavy pitcher from her cradling hip and placed it before the poet. Opyros carefully refilled his stein before returning to the closely written lines. His voice calmer now, he began to read, moistening his throat now and again. Occasionally Kane interrupted to quarrel upon a point of syntax or such, until Opyros, wondering at the other's command of a language not his own, made marginal notations with a metal pen which he dipped in slopped ale and rubbed against a chunk of ink. The poet had long ago given up any effort to penetrate the shroud of mystery that enswathed Kane. Even so simple a matter as Kane's age defied certainty. Physically, he appeared not far past Opyros's 30 years, but this was deceptive since Kane's experience ranged somewhat beyond this. The stranger was an enigma, and Opyros valued his friendship too highly to make indiscreet inquiries. He accepted the mystery, musing only privately over certain dark hints that whispered from the shadow of Kane's past. Well over a year had passed since Opyros had first met him, wandering pensively through the forest-buried ruins of the old city at dusk. Sensing a kindred spirit, despite the other's forbidding appearance, Opyros had called out to him from his favorite perch alongside a crumbling fountain. The stranger returned his greeting in cultured tones of indefinable accent, and for the first time Opyros felt the murderous chill of Kane's blue eyes. Casual remarks had revealed an astonishing knowledge of the old city on the stranger's part, and Opyros was surprised when this man nonchalantly spoke upon various points of mystery and arcane lore surrounding the ruins of which the poet was only vaguely aware, although his study of such things was an avid one. Opyros made some speculative observations on the reasons for the abandonment of the old city over 2 centuries ago, and Kane laughed strangely. Less piqued than curious, the poet sought to draw the other out, but Kane had made only evasive replies to his questions until Opyros introduced himself. Kane immediately expressed interest in the poet's work, and, losing some of his brooding reserve, invited him to further their acquaintance across a tavern table. Chance meeting developed into friendship, and Opyrus soon became even more familiar with the dark alleys and hidden ways of Encellios as he regularly sought out Kane's company. The exact nature of Kane's business in the northern city Opyrus cared not to discover, although he sensed it was a more subtle game than the various underworld activities he knew Kane to have assumed control over. It was only another mystery surrounding the stranger. Like his unexpected depth of learning, his easy familiarity with the writings of poets and sages of strange lands and other ages, Kane's critical abilities Opyrus found to be sound and perceptive, so that he frequently brought fragments of his own work to read to the other, finding worthwhile the arguments and tangled far-reaching discussions that usually lasted from darkness to light. It was a rare friendship for Opyrus, and he guessed such was the case with Kane as well. The poet was an outcast among the aristocracy of Encellios, to which he was born, nor did he care for their shallow company. Although his work was becoming widely known across the northern continent, and the genius of his verses was unquestioned, the macabre direction of his interest had earned Opyrus a shadowed reputation among the intellectuals and dilettantes of his audience. Thus literary acclaim escaped him, although notoriety did not, and Opyrus was loved no better by those with pretensions of culture than by those whose pride was their lineage and wealth. He knew no kinship with the lower classes of society, and they, in turn, believed him mad. Society's rejection of the poet and his work, while it left him bitter, did not raise a barrier to his writing. As final heir to his family's estates and fortune, he was able to ignore this alienation and to pursue the untraveled paths along which his genius led him. It often occurred to Opyrus that he was as much an outlaw as Kane and the hard-eyed creatures who passed about them. "Anything new on night winds?" asked Kane once Opyrus had finished reading from the parchment. His companion frowned. "Oh, I've written a few more things, written and rewritten a dozen times. Still can't bring it around to what I want." Kane grunted sympathetically. Opyrus had been struggling with night winds for months now, overtaxing himself to create what he intended to be his masterpiece, a perfect statement of his conception of art. As usually happens with any attempt toward a consciously conceived masterwork, the zeal for perfection overwhelmed the artist's ability to create. Opyrus had made countless false starts, had worked himself into nervous exhaustion, spent days obsessed with the preciseness, the imagery of a single line of verse, and night winds had advanced little beyond the initial torrent of inspiration which had burst from a fevered dream. Thinking some diversion might relax the poet after this intense concentration, Kane suggested some fragments of another poem for him to develop. Opyrus dutifully worked on Gods in Darkness for Kane, along with a number of his own projects, but night winds continued to loom over his imagination. "Well, let's hear some of it," Kane prompted. Opyrus ran a nervous hand through his sandy hair and down his face, absently noted the stubble starting from his jaw where the goatee did not extend. What day was this? Again he filled his stein. The ale was soothing the shrieking after-images in his mind. Without preamble, somewhat defiantly, he seized another smudged and scribbled sheet and read, "At night, when sleep will not come, and darkness hangs in thick smothering folds to throttle my breath, crush the heart in my breast, and squats on my belly like a hot, bloated succubus, when I lie burning in restless, sick pain, listening to the rush of my pulse, the hammer of my heart, and sense without caring that this is the last hour, night winds come. Then let the night winds come to me, pass through a clear window, blow out the sick flame, touch cold breath to this fever-burnt flesh, Caress with chill kisses this fever-seared mind. Take up my poisoned soul in your restoring embrace. Bear me off to strange lands. Show me those unseen sights along untrod paths. You and the stars know their secrets. Though death be your destination, I'll not beg to linger when night winds come. Then let the night winds take me. Lift my crippled spirit on your vast black wings, and I'll soar with you through the shadow. Whisper softly in my desolate thoughts, and I'll learn the wisdom of the dark. Brush your fingers across my blinded eyes, and I'll see the secret world of night. And with you I'll explore those lost and hidden places where only the night winds come. Opyros read on haltingly as the poem became more fragmented, little more than disjointed passages of description. His half-formed verses told of sand drifting over a desert tomb and why it lay empty, of a wind in a forest where a goddess lay dying, of broken battlements and the pale beauty who walked them, of black surf on fanged cliffs and the shadows that lurked there, of mountains of eternal ice where an elder race dreamed. He finished with a pained grimace. Angrily he slapped the folio together, swept up his mug, and drained it in a huge gulp that shuddered down his long throat. Well, Kane's expression was non-committal. I think you're getting it together. What there is of it, I like. The images you propose are more compelling this time. The atmosphere is beginning to project, almost without awareness of the mounting tension. Structurally it seems rough yet, though the mood begins to impress me as forced, Opyros snorted. Artificial and forced? It's still a first draft, though I've lain sleepless over it for months now. My imagery is either overpowering or too vague. I can't seem to project the vitality, the reality of the mood. It's starting to come across, Kane protested. The atmosphere will improve as the work progresses, I think. Hell, put some of those fragments together for once and give it some sort of conclusion, however indecisive it sounds at first. Work off the rough edges, and then judge what needs to be done with it. At least you'll have something concrete to grapple with. I think you're already close to writing as brilliant a work as any you've completed. Opyros made a scornful noise in his mug. Yeah, as brilliant as anything I've done. As imperfect, you mean. Damn it, Kane, for once I'd like to feel I'd written something that was perfect. No, don't start on one of those creaky philosophical discussions upon the non-existence of true perfection. I mean, I'd hope at least once to be able to create a poem that I myself could call perfect. To hell with any other point of reference. There isn't a single thing that I've done that I'm totally satisfied with. All of it represents a compromise between what I'm able to create and what I want to create. I know when a verse isn't exactly right, but damn it, I can't understand how to improve it beyond a certain point. And what is perfection to your mind? Queried Kane sardonically, thinking that this conversation in one form or another had dried their throats on more nights than this. A perfect poem, declared the other, without faltering, is one which completely involves its audience in the totality of the poem. It should be a total sensory and emotional projection of the artist's mind into the mind of the listener. He should identify fully with the perspective, the reality of the poem, share the thoughts, sense the atmosphere, see the visions, unite with the mood. Any fool clever with words can create a poem that any fool can listen to. A good poet creates a poem so that a sensitive mind can share and be stirred by his thoughts, but to create a poem that can totally draw any dull imagination into its spell, that, Kane, is perfect art, and that is the creation of a true genius. An intriguing theory of art, Kane commented after a slight pause. but I think you'll destroy yourself emotionally if you keep up this quest for an unobtainable perfection. I have a high regard for your talents, Opyros, but it seems to me the genius you've proposed transcends human limitations. Don't tell me Kane is suddenly preaching that pious doctrine of man's inevitable failure whenever he dares to challenge those heights to which only gods may aspire, sneered Opyros, and immediately regretted his words. Kane's baleful eyes held him in cold speculation for a moment, wondering how much of this was a chance taunt. That wasn't what I said, or what I meant, as you must know, he returned with icy calm. More bluntly, can you realistically consider your own genius equal to this goal? Opyros stared at his clenched hands. I don't know, he confessed, wishing to escape Kane's gaze. That's what tortures me. Technically, I know how to do it. Rhyme, meter, the words, the notes. I understand how the material should be woven, only I still can't grasp the substance. I need inspiration, a flash of insight, something that will lift my imagination from where it's mired down in commonplace ideas. What use to waste my creativity in turning out another poem like all the rest? The same tired images, the same dull emotions. There has to be some new vitality to my poem. I must create it from ideas and images that are unique, not simply the rewritten thoughts of past artists. He muttered fitfully under his breath and reached again for the pitcher. Surprisingly, someone had emptied it already. Did you catch the references in Opyros' verse to different stories by Clark Ashton Smith, by H.P. Lovecraft? Frozen mountains where an elder race dreams, undying folks beneath a desert. Opyros' torment, his wondering about creating something that stands on its own, that's not just the ideas, the retreaded thoughts of another author, are particularly poignant when we remember that Karl Edward Wagner was instrumental in publishing Conan stories as they were originally constructed, and had also done some of the best Conan pastiches of any of his fellow authors, and was tormented himself by a terrible alcohol addiction. Opyros is a stand-in for Karl Edward Wagner, and Opyros, I believe, is also a deliberate nod to the kind of naming conventions used by Clark Ashton Smith. Here again, Karl Edward Wagner situates himself in history, and I look forward to seeing how this tale will resolve itself. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and make sure that you check the link in the bio for my shop, where you can support this channel by buying my work.